Over time, we find that the giants were killed, and they were easy targets because you could say, okay, this is a Nephilim, look, they're a giant, or so forth. And so David and others, were very effective at taking them out. So they had to come up with a new plan, and this was a new plan. A little more DNA manipulation, a little more human-looking, and then they begin to come out, as it says in the prophecy there of Jacob and Esau, that they now dwell in the fatness of the land and in the rich and luxurious places. And so now they've taken on what I call holy garb, or suits and ties. And they're very refined, very wealthy, very powerful, very influential people in high places of government and high places of medical fields and all those sorts of places, and they're among us today. Well, we know that when the host body is gone, then the spirit comes out and is looking for another host. Now, interestingly enough, prior to the flood, the earth was one landmass. And so the giants went all over, and the Nephilim, their offspring, went everywhere. And then after the flood, we know at the time of Peleg that the nations were divided like they are now into 7 continents and 7 seas. And so this time, it says in Genesis chapter 6, verse 4, it says that the giants were on the earth in those days, which means prior to the flood, or up to the flood. And then it also says, and then afterwards. Oh. So we know that they came again. And they came back again. Now, what happened? We see their first appearance in the Bible in Numbers 13, where it talks about the giants, where the people went down to the promised land and they saw the DNA-altered fruit that was too big to carry. We saw the whole animal structure there had been affected with the Nephilim again. In other words, the Nephilim knew that Moses was going to come in the promised land, so they'd already come and corrupted that and tried to work against it. Now, what happens when the spirit comes out? Well, we know that something happened to Noah, or Noah's sons, because Noah was perfect in all his generations. That's why God chose Noah before the flood, because he was uncorrupted by the Nephilim and by the serpent seed. And so it says it was perfect in all his generations. That doesn't mean morally perfect as much as we'd like to mean, but it just meant that he had not allowed himself to be defiled by the intermingling there.
He was a pure race of man.
He was. And so something happened after the flood, because it says in Genesis 6, and afterwards they were on the earth. And so we know the case where it says that Noah planted a vineyard and he got drunk. Oh, bless Noah, but he messed up because he became uncovered. And his son Ham saw that he was uncovered. And that means a lot of things that could have happened there. But basically, something transpired there which activated an open door for the Nephilim to come back.
Right.
And so they did come back. And we see from Noah's time on, from Ham's time on, where he pronounced a curse. Curse would be Canaan. So we see that the line of Canaan from that on began to be an embodiment for that serpent seed, which goes all the way to Goliath and to Og and all the way on. So when those disembodied spirits were left in lingo, they were looking for an open door. And so they began to come back and began to populate again. But this time it was a much smaller type of distribution, because the landmass in Peleg's time was divided. So now they're back on the earth, and now David's fighting them. Everybody's fighting them, and so they're back in the land. And so what happens is that when a giant's killed, well, then it's just like Saddam Hussein. When he's killed, all those spirits go somewhere. They're looking for another host. And so there's just a repeated resurgence of them as they can find a host all throughout time. It's deception is first and foremost. They're preparing the world to receive the Antichrist as the Messiah. And they're going to do that in a couple of ways. I believe there'll be a returning of them through UFO-type sightings and manifestations. There'll be a working of them as these super soldiers that we know will work with the Antichrist. They'll be almost unstoppable. We also know that they're going to be in high places of influence, which they are today, power brokers of money, finances, and all those sorts of things, population control. So they'll be working all together, that mystery Babylon, that spirit of Babylon, just like Nimrod, by the way, who was a Nephilim king, who came right after Noah's time. He was the first one world ruler. And so from him on, Satan has always wanted another one. And so the Nephilim are working with that Nimrod-type person all the way through to set up the coming of the Antichrist. And they did it so well. I mean, it was the Nephilim that were in the Pharisees and scribes, as we know. Jesus called them what they were. Oh, you brood of vipers. He said, you know, you serpent seed. He called them what they were. You have no redemption. He told them that. Well, they actually convinced the entire Israeli population that indeed that Christ was the bad one, and that the Pharisees were the good one. So there was the deception. They bought it. Instead of the giants killing Jesus, now they came in holy garb, so to speak, and so they twisted the whole thing, and they had their own people kill the Messiah seed, the promised seed, from Genesis 3:15, instead of them having to get their own hands dirty. So the deception is to turn the world again, and to turn the world through understanding, lying, signs and wonders, every sort of thing imaginable, to prepare the world to receive the Antichrist. Dealing with iniquities and the mystery of iniquity and any impureness that can be in our bloodline or our lives, so that we have nothing in us as believers that the Nephilim can work through or manipulate. Because Satan did say in Isaiah 14, he talked about the 5 I wills. And so everything that's going to come at us will be in those 5 I wills. He's determined to be worshipped as God. And so pride and lust and perversion and all that's going to be involved with that. It's going to come out as the, you know, the spirit of Balaam and you know, the things that Jude talks about, those 3 manifestations of corruptness. And so as believers, you and I must be pure. We must become without spot or wrinkle, because everything that they do has spot and wrinkle in it. And so there's a mandate for us to overcome, a Revelation 3, to overcome the world, the flesh, and the devil, as Jesus did, so we can be seated with him on his throne, just as he overcame and is seated with his Father on his throne. I'm hearing the word talked about most assuredly, the word most assuredly. Jesus said it several times in Scripture, and it's going to be an important word for this decade of believers as their innocence is unmasked in the days ahead, particularly in 2012 and beyond, as we begin to see evil like we've never seen before on the earth. And it's though the Lord would have me to say, remember what he said, most assuredly I say unto you. Those are going to be important words in the days ahead. So if you've had a witness on that word, lock into the Scripture, because at what Jesus did, you will do also with great victory. Many of you have been wondering about the Nephilim and about what their agenda truly is, and we've been speaking to that at some length, but there's much, much more. More of you have been wondering, is there going to be a film or a documentary or something on this? And indeed, you may be one that the Lord is calling. I just feel like there's a rising up of creativity and some research that needs to be done on this particular topic. So if that's you, please pursue it and either document it or write about it, because this is a generation that needs to have this word unfolded. And if it's burning in you, please pursue it. I believe the Lord's going to have you bring more revelation in the days to come.
In the American Midwest, there are also many large mounds, which are said to be graves. An author who has sold over 15 million books and written extensively on giants is Brad Steiger.
Mass graves of giants were opened. Some of the men 8 feet tall, some of the women 7 feet tall, some records of men 10 feet tall, and extremely large skulls. And extraordinarily, some of these skulls had horns, some had extra rows of teeth, some had other what we would call anomalies, but they were extraordinarily large skulls and extraordinarily large people.
A maverick archaeologist who has long been fascinated by legends of American giants is David Hatcher Childress.
A number of mounds in the Midwest in America were excavated starting in around 1850. And in many cases, they would find skeletons of people who were in excess of 7 feet tall. And in many cases, they had double rows of teeth, as well as, in some cases, 6 fingers on each hand and 6 toes on each foot.
The one that was found in Bridal Veil Falls, California by a group of miners, first they found this wall with very intricate hieroglyphics. They assumed that they were finding gold behind the wall. They broke it down, and they found this woman holding a child covered with fur and a strange kind of dust. The same tall female mummified remains have been found in Texas. They have been found in Death Valley. They have been found in other parts of California.
These old photographs and newspaper clippings are all that survive of these mysterious giants. Winner of the Newsmaker of the Year award, journalist Jim Mars has a special interest in speculative science.
Archaeology at that time was in a heyday. There was everybody that had a shovel was out trying to find something. But what's interesting is that the finding of these giant mummified bodies and giant fossils and bones, really you can't pin to any particular location. They were finding them in Greece, they were finding them in Italy, they were finding them in the Middle East, they were finding them in America. And even if you write off a few of those as perhaps a hoax or a misinterpretation of something else, you're still left with a tremendous amount of evidence to show that there were these giant beings at some point walking the earth.
In 1912, ranchers started coming to this isolated cave near Lovelock, Nevada, to dig out bat guano for fertilizer. Inside, a surprise was waiting for them.
They began excavating the 10 to 15 feet of guano that was here in this cave. They started discovering some unusual artifacts. They found duck decoys and baskets, other things for hunting and fishing in the nearby lake that's now drying up. But then they made some very unusual discoveries, and those were of red-haired giants that were mummified. These giants were 6.5 to 7 feet tall. In many cases, they were mummified, wrapped up like Egyptian mummies, and they had long red hair going down to their shoulders. The ranchers couldn't explain it. It was the strangest thing they'd ever seen. But the Paiute Indians who lived around here knew all about it. In fact, back in 1883, Sarah Winnemucca, a Paiute Indian princess, had written a book called Life Among the Paiutes. In that book, she talked all about the giant, red-haired people who used to live around this lake and live in this cave. She claimed they were cannibals.
That tribe would eat the dead. They would make war on my people. My people went to work and gathered wood to fill up the mouth of the cave. At last my people set it on fire and called out to them, "Give up or you will die." But no answer came.
Now, one of the great mysteries of the West is what happened to these giants. There was nearly 60 skeletons brought out of this cave, but today they're nowhere to be found. Is it that there is some kind of archaeological cover-up that has occurred here? Something that concerns giants?
Perhaps the entire story may be a rural legend, or like tons of buffalo bones, the remains may have been burned and used with the bat guano as fertilizer. Whatever the explanation, proof that there were giants here has disappeared. Yet at the same time, tantalizing clues to their existence can be found all over the world. In South America, there are giant figures carved into rock so huge that at ground level it's hard to tell what they depict. Though from the sky, that becomes dramatically clear. This one in Chile, known as Cerro Unitas, at over 300 feet high, is believed to be the largest representation of a human-like figure in the world. Who carved it and why remains a mystery. Half a world away in the United Kingdom, Other giant figures stare up into the sky. This one is known as Cerne Abbas near Shaftesbury. Cut into the chalky hillside, no one knows how long ago, it may represent the mythical hero Hercules. 160 miles away, the Long Man of Wilmington, 280 feet from head to toe.